Peter Valley, FBAmastery.com here. You guys, this video is really how all videos should be on YouTube. Very simple, very short, very useful, actionable advice. Let's get into it. 3 overlooked book categories that most Amazon sellers miss. And I'm speaking from experience here. The reason I'm covering these 3 is that I personally slept on these for the longest time until I realized, wow, there's actually a lot of money in these 3 categories. So let's get into it. Weird, profitable book category number 1 that most sellers miss: old university press books. Now, to a certain extent, in fact, to a large extent, this would also apply to new university press books, but I'm mostly focusing on older university press books for a couple of reasons that I'll get into. But when I say university press books, what I'm referring to is books published by universities. In other words, you turn the book over and the publisher is described as University of Blank Press or Blank State University Press, or somehow indicating it's published by a university or college. There are, I don't even know how many. I would dare say hundreds of university presses around the country. And you're likely to not even know these exist unless you start paying attention. But there is tons of money in this category. And again, these are likely just to look like generic, older, kind of just uninteresting nonfiction book. But what makes these particularly interesting to me is when I see university press on the back. Okay, so why do I like the weird category of university press books? So number 1, they're niche. So inherent in them being published by university press, they're on very, very narrow subject matter of interest, primarily only to people in academia. And that could be college students or professors. But university presses serve people in very, very narrow niches, which is always a good recipe for value. So you can see this title here: Indigenous Enlightenment, Printing and Education in Evangelical Colonialism, 1790 to 1850. Okay, harder to get more niche than that. And by the way, I pulled this right off the top of, I think it was University of Nebraska Press website. So it's not like I had to dig to find a book this niche. They really almost always are this narrowly focused. And another major reason I love university press books, particularly the older ones, is that university presses allow a lot of their catalog to fall out of print. So if you take a bigger publisher like McGraw-Hill or Penguin or one of these big publishers, they very rarely, probably only when there's a lawsuit involved, do they ever actually let a book fall out of print. They keep everything in print. And so when a book's in print, guess what? The value stays low because there's always an endless supply. Now with the university press books, they let their books fall out of print all the time. Their back catalog just essentially gets dissolved and forgotten about, and the used copies that are floating around can start commanding some serious value. So anytime you combine niche with out of print, that is a recipe for money. And that's also a reason I particularly like these when I see that they're older. In fact, if I can see a university press book that has no barcode, I begin salivating immediately, and I have to get rushed to the hospital because it becomes that much of a problem. So keep your eyes open. Okay, and you guys, can I mention, can you just subscribe to the YouTube channel really quickly? I'd really appreciate it. Get more videos like this, and also see the article version of this at FBAmastery.com. Okay, weird book category that most Amazon sellers miss. Number 2 is old math books. Now, why old math books? It's kind of weird. I think most Amazon sellers, if they found a newer, more recent math book, particularly any math book with a barcode, if it looked a little bit weird and niche, they'd probably just scan it. So I don't think most Amazon sellers are missing those. You should pay attention to those. But what I think is particularly overlooked is old math books that have no barcodes. So you might be wondering, why am I fixated on math? Why do math books have a particularly high likelihood of being valuable? Well, the reason I like these and the reason these tend to hold their value is that math is the only subject, when you think about it, the only subject that is truly, literally timeless. In other words, a book published on any obscure mathematical formula or field or whatever the term is just as relevant in 1850 as it is in 2023 or 2024 or at any point in the future. It's kind of weird to think about, but math truly is timeless. And I might be off base here, but I can't think of any other field or subject matter that is truly timeless the way that math is. Now, I have to confess, this is not my own profound observation. Okay, I was actually at a thrift store one time in Boulder, Colorado. A couple blocks from the University of Colorado, and I was sourcing books, and somebody saw me doing it, and I don't know who the guy was. I assume he was a professor or someone in academia, but I don't know for certain. And he sees me scanning books, and he says, "Hey, anytime you see an old math book, I want you to look that book up. Pay attention to those books. Old math books are worth a lot of money." And so I'm just kind of like, okay, people give you advice, and you're just like, okay, it's not your business. You don't really know what you're talking about. And I said, okay, why do you think that is? And he said, because math is the only subject that is literally timeless. And he said he consumes math books, and he sees a book written a long time ago. These books fell out of print, and they're impossible to duplicate. In other words, there'll be a book on some obscure mathematical formula, and there's no other book like it in the entire world. And it falls out of print, and it's just as relevant when it was written as it is today. And so once he imparted this wisdom on me, I was like, I still didn't really believe him, and I started to pay attention to older math books, and it turns out he was right. A vastly disproportionate amount of the time, if you pick up any book on some area of math that looks just incomprehensible to people like you and I who are not mathematicians, go ahead and look that up. In other words, key in the ISBN, scan it with OCR, or if it has a barcode, of course, scan it. But give it attention. What's crazy is how often these books look just like totally unremarkable. Like no cover art, just plain text, and you're likely just to kind of move on. It just looks like some irrelevant old book. Turns out it's worth a lot of money. So math is gold. Weird book category that most Amazon sellers miss. Number 3, nonfiction. Notice that's underlined. Nonfiction mass market paperbacks. So if you don't know what a mass market paperback is, it's the little romance novel-sized books that you see all over the place and you probably ignore. I used to ignore these because if you give any amount of attention to this category, you're likely to get discouraged very quickly. They're almost never worth money. And not only that, it gets extra frustrating because a lot of the barcodes, when you scan them, they come up as non-existent because what you're scanning is actually the UPC code. They don't even put the ISBN in the barcode. So it's very confusing, and you're just likely to come away thinking there's no value to be found here. And that is accurate almost all the time. The one exception I've found, not the only exception that exists, but the only exception that I've found personally and have a lot of experience with is nonfiction mass market paperbacks. If you see a book this size, a tiny books, and it's nonfiction, I'm going to scan that almost all the time, particularly if it looks a little bit weird and a little bit niche, like this book you see here on UFOs. Okay, so why do I like these so much? Okay, so number 1, most sellers miss these. Most sellers dismiss mass market paperbacks entirely, wholesale. Don't even bother with them at all. So there's tons of value left behind, even if you're in a really competitive environment. Number 2, they often have no barcodes. So in other words, you turn the book over, you scan the barcode, as I just mentioned, it comes up blank. It comes up no results on your scanning app. Now, what I found often, not all the time, in fact, not even most of the time, but often there's actually a second barcode on the inside cover. So you open the inside cover, you see a barcode that actually has the ISBN on it. A lot of people don't know this. It's a weird little glitch in these books. I'm not really clear why it's done this way. And so this is kind of tied to item number 1 here, which is most sellers miss these. One of the reasons they do is there's no barcodes to scan. So again, sellers leave tons of these behind. They're worth a lot of money. So this can get really interesting when you find old books, again, on anything weird. You kind of see the pattern here. But also like old books on certain celebrities that kind of were published. They maybe did one printing or for whatever reason they fell out of print. Those can command some serious value. Really anything nonfiction, unless it looks too generic and too mass market and like the audience is too broad, I'm probably going to scan it or otherwise look it up. Now, I will mention, I kind of alluded that fiction in this category is worthless. In other words, mass market fiction. I will say I've heard of other sellers having really, really good experience with certain niches of fiction in this category. Personally, for me, this is a big blind spot. I just have not been able to identify what those niches are. But you hear some things like some sellers talk about certain categories within mass market paperbacks like Dungeons and Dragons books and things like that having a lot of value. Personally, I've never been able to crack that code. So I don't mean to be dismissive of all fiction in this format. But just in my experience, I've never been able to figure it out. So I just focus solely on the nonfiction. Okay, so what did we just learn here? First of all, focus on where other sellers aren't looking. That's where the money is. Most sellers take the low-hanging fruit books and they ignore books like the 3 categories we just talked about. There's many others. And they just simply leave them behind most of the time because these books just simply don't have barcodes. So the sellers just don't give them attention. So our profit is in their blind spots. Keep that in mind. I hope you got lots of value out of this. This is Peter Valley signing off. Go to fbamastery.com, get on my email list, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you in the next video.